The following video is prepared by Jpro Business Training. Culture and configuration. This article focuses on two areas of the Strategic Business Leader (SBL) syllabus on preparing and evaluating a cultural web of an organization, and the importance of organizational structure and configuration. Knowledge brought forward from the Business and Technology (BT) exam. In the ACCA qualification, organizational culture and structure first arise in the Business and Technology (BT) exam. Organizational culture was described by Handy as the way we do things round here. Most of us are very sensitive to organizational culture and tread warily when joining a new school, college, or employer. We want to see how they do things round there. With regard to organizational culture, the work of three academics is mentioned. 1. Handy's 4 cultural stereotypes. These are: power culture. Here, power is concentrated in the hands of one person, the boss. This culture is often found in small, family businesses, particularly where the name of the business is the same as the name of the boss. Fast, but perhaps arbitrary, decisions can be made. As businesses grow, it becomes more difficult for one person to wield absolute power simply because of the demands on their time and ability. However, it is sometimes seen in large organizations, but then it is usually taken as a danger sign, and many of the corporate governance rules are there specifically to spread power and reduce risks. For example, splitting the roles of chief executive and chairman, holding regular board meetings to encourage collective responsibility, and balancing executive and non-executive directors. Role culture. This is characterized by a traditional organizational structure in which jobs are arranged by function and seniority, and each employee has a distinct role and job specification. This culture can be efficient in a stable environment in which employees are expected to do the same tasks year in year out, but can lead to inflexibility and can slow down response to change as employees defend their roles and rewards. Task culture. Here, the emphasis is on getting the job done. Flexibility is encouraged and it is more important to serve customers and clients well than to defend one's role. This culture is much more responsive to environmental and competitive developments. Person culture. In the person culture, the employee is following a personal ambition in the context of the organization and interacts with the organization as little as possible. In this culture, the individual is the central point. The organization is seen as serving the individuals within it. Barristers' chambers, architects' partnerships, and small consultancy firms often have this person orientation. The organization structure is as minimal as possible. The individuals are clustered together, a small galaxy of individual stars. 2. Shines determinants of organizational culture. These are: artifacts. These are the influences on culture that can be seen. For example, how employees dress, the layout of the office, the way in which people behave. Espoused values. These are the strategies, goals, and objectives of the organization. For example, an emphasis on low cost or an emphasis on excellent service. Basic assumptions and values. These are the taken for granted beliefs. They can be called a paradigm, which is a set of assumptions held in common. 3. Hofstede's international perspectives on culture. Hofstede recognized that people in different countries often have different outlooks and that these will influence organizational culture. The influences are: power distance. Cultures that favor low power distance expect power relations to be relatively consultative or democratic. In high power distance countries, the less powerful accept power relations that are more autocratic. Individualism v collectivism. Individualistic societies place stress on personal achievements. In collectivist societies, individuals act predominantly as members of a group or team. Uncertainty avoidance. People in cultures with high uncertainty avoidance tend to be more cautious and proceed by careful planning. Low uncertainty avoidance cultures feel relatively comfortable making unstructured situations and dealing with changing and novel environments. Long-term orientation v. short-term orientation. Long-term oriented cultures attach importance to the future and place emphasis on persistence, flexibility, and a willingness to change. Short-term oriented cultures emphasize tradition and meeting social expectations. Masculinity v. femininity. Masculine cultures include competitiveness and assertiveness. Feminine cultures place greater emphasis on relationships and consensus. With regard to organizational structure and configuration, the BT syllabus mentions entrepreneurial, functional, departmental, divisional, and matrix structures. An entrepreneurial structure is one in which the owner, the entrepreneur, dominates. An entrepreneurial structure tends to be found in new businesses, where the entrepreneur is still a hands-on manager. A power culture and an entrepreneurial structure will normally go hand in hand. A functional and departmental structure is a conventional structure with different departments for accounting, sales and marketing, research and development, and so on. This structure can be efficient and can lead to economies of scale, but as departments increase in size and power, they can begin to look after their own interests more than the organization's. Then a functional organization has taken on the characteristics of a role culture, intense interest in role rather than getting the job done. As businesses grow, there is often a degree of diversification as new products and new markets are developed. It then often makes sense to set up separate divisions for each market and product group as this allows specialization. So, the European division will know about pricing, competitors, customer preferences in Europe, and the North American division will develop expertise for that market. A matrix structure is very common in project-led organizations as it allows multi-skilled teams to be set up for each project. However, it will mean that an employee is responsible to two superiors, and this was anathema to classical management theory. For example, the person shown below is responsible to the Project B manager and to the Quality Control manager. It is easy to imagine a situation where the project manager puts pressure on the employee to cut out some tests because the project is slipping and, at the same time, the Quality Control manager would put pressure on the employee to carry out full testing. The wrong way for the employee to choose what to do is to comply with the wishes of the manager who shouts louder. Anyhow, it is unfair to expect the most junior member of the trio to make the decision. However, the matrix structure could empower the employee to point out to the two managers that there is a conflict and that they, as managers and as more experienced employees, should get together to resolve the problem. A matrix structure. 1. Tall and flat organizations. The difference between tall narrow and wide flat organizations. Tall narrow organizations are characterized by having many management layers, with each manager looking after only a few subordinates. Wide flat configurations have relatively few layers, but each manager has many subordinates. In the 1990s and 2000s, many organizations made a determined effort to move from tall narrow to wide flat. This process is known as delayering or flattening the organization. The drivers behind this structural change are cost. There was increasing price competition from products made in developing countries, and it was recognized that costs could be saved by getting rid of many of the middle management layers. Slow, poor communication. The tall narrow structure fragments the organization and imposes many layers between the bottom and the top of the organization. If person A in the diagram above needs to communicate with the chief executive officer at the top, in a strictly run organization, the message might have to pass through many layers of managers, leaving scope for delay, misunderstanding, and distortion. If person A needs to communicate with person B, once again many managers might be involved. In stable environments, people at the bottom of organizations rarely needed to communicate with the top. However, nowadays, new recruits are likely to have valuable information that top management needs to know. For example, the use of social media such as Facebook in marketing and stakeholder communication. Inflexibility. Many layers of management imply many grades of pay and benefits, and, if the organization needed to change to respond to environmental developments, the large number of managers can be obstructive so as to defend their positions. Moving to a flat narrow configuration can address these problems. Note that the tall narrow structure is likely to exhibit a role culture, whereas the wide flat structure is more likely to have a task culture. The movement to wide flat can also provide job enrichment because if a manager has more people to look after, less time can be given to each, and employees are therefore almost inevitably given more responsibility. 2. Centralization and Decentralization. Centralization means that most decision-making is retained at the top of an organization, and this implies a power culture. Decentralization means that decision-making is passed down through the group, and this brings the following advantages. Top management has more time to concentrate on the most important decisions. Decisions are made by technical experts, are made more quickly, and are made with an awareness of local conditions. The best person to decide about advertising in Brazil is almost certainly someone with a marketing background resident in Brazil, rather than a chief executive from an accounting background based in London. Motivation of staff. Giving decision-making responsibility is an excellent example of job enrichment. On the downside, there is an increased chance of dysfunctional decision-making, where one division or department makes a decision that hurts the group overall. To reduce the chance of this, management needs to keep a coordinating role. Back to top. The cultural web. This is usually depicted as follows. The cultural web. In essence, this is a list of the factors that influence culture. It is a more detailed list than Shine's artifacts, espoused values, and basic assumptions and values. An approximate correlation between the two approaches is. Swipe to view table. Cultural web. Shine. Symbols and titles. For example, how people dress and how they are addressed. Artifacts. Power relations. For example, autocratic or participative. Artifacts. Organizational structure. For example, tall narrow or wide flat. Artifacts. Control systems. For example, highly centralized or decentralized. Artifacts. Rituals and routines. For example, a regular start of week meeting. Espoused values. Myths and stories. For example, a story about when the organization won an important client. Espoused values. Organization assumption, paradigm. For example, that the organization exists to fulfill charitable objectives. Basic assumptions and values. Cultural web is a very useful way of analyzing organizational culture and could have been used to great effect in all of the questions mentioned at the start of this article. Mintzberg's organizational configurations. From BT, you should remember that Mintzberg suggested that an organization consisted of 5 elements. The strategic apex, the board and top management. The middle line, middle managers responsible for carrying out the decisions of the strategic apex, the chain of command down through the organization. The operating core, the workers. Support staff, departments such as accounting, personnel and IT. The technocracy, the people responsible for devising and enforcing standards and procedures such as the personnel manual, the internal control system, the quality control system, health and safety rules. The size and importance of these elements depends on the type of organization being described, and diagrams can be drawn to illustrate this, but the diagrams are not needed for the exam. The characteristics of 3 of Mintzberg's organizational stereotypes are as follows. The simple structure. This consists only of the strategic apex and the operating core. It is the boss and the workers and equates to Handy's power culture and to entrepreneurial organizations. Indeed, the simple structure is often known as the entrepreneurial structure. Machine bureaucracy. This refers to the structure that is common in mass manufacturing industries. The middle line is lengthy, implying tall narrow, with many management layers. The technocracy is large because in manufacturing companies, making large numbers of identical items, it is essential that production, quality, safety training and finance are carefully and repeatedly regulated. The professional bureaucracy. The professional bureaucracy. This refers to the structure that is typically found in firms of lawyers or accountants. The middle line is relatively short, implying wide flat, with good communication between the top and bottom of the organization. The technostructure is small because, although documentation can be standardized, each job is unique and is therefore not capable of standardization. Because each job is unique, the partners, strategic apex, have to discuss directly the problems and findings of the accounting or legal staff who are closely involved with the work, the operating core. The professional form of organization appears wherever the work of the organization is dominated by skilled workers who use procedures that are difficult to learn yet are well defined. Schools, universities, and hospitals are prime examples. Action of configuration and cultures. It is important to realize that cultures and configurations go hand in hand. Indeed, Mintzberg has said that configurations are not just cultures, nor even just power systems. They are cultures. For example, a tall narrow hierarchical structure will usually imply a role culture and a machine bureaucracy with great emphasis on control, symbols, titles, and strict power relations. As mentioned earlier, this can work well in stable environments, where the paradigm will often be based around efficiency and cost leadership. It is also needed in high-risk environments where careful supervision of subordinates is needed. In contrast, a wide flat structure will more often imply a task culture and a professional bureaucracy, with little emphasis on symbols of hierarchy, more participative decision-making, and fewer stultifying controls. Here, the paradigm is more likely to be based around customer service, responsiveness, differentiation, and innovation. Application of culture and organizational configuration to scenarios. Culture and organizational configuration could be examined in the following contexts. 1. Culture clashes. A good example of this can be illustrated where there is a power culture that a new employee tried, unsuccessfully, to change to a role culture. Another example can be where a new director attempted to change both structure and culture to the fury of established personnel or in relation to mergers that do not stand the test of time. In 2020, 2 years after SAP acquired Qualtrics, it announced that it would spin the Qualtrics unit out with an IPO. In terms of the spin-off, SAP would retain majority ownership of Qualtrics, and the Qualtrics leadership team would remain the same. One of the main reasons for the spin-off seemed to be cultural incompatibility. SAP is an older company with a more traditional executive structure that may not have been able to combine cultures or adapt to the new cultural elements of Qualtrics, a much younger, entrepreneurial, startup-type company. This could have resulted in problems integrating the businesses together and ultimately meant that they could not operate together and so have been split apart again through the spin-off. 2. Inappropriate cultures and configurations. For example, if an organization wanted to change its generic strategy from cost leadership to differentiation, almost certainly both culture and configuration will have to change. A similar issue can be illustrated, where the work routines effectively excluded female staff and customers were treated as lazy and incompetent. The survival of some organizations is threatened by clinging to a culture that is no longer appropriate, either within the industry sector or within society as a whole. Culture and configuration have to be changed to allow survival, however hard that is on individuals currently employed in the company. 3. Different stages of an organization's life cycle. Also, there may be situations illustrating how a business's culture and structure change throughout its life cycle, and how it should be managed. The company may have started in an entrepreneurial power culture with a charismatic leader who recruited like-minded employees. Formal controls could have been non-existent and the company was fun to work in. Later it could become listed and inevitably have to adopt much more of a role culture. Controls will become tighter and public scrutiny will affect rituals, symbols, and the organizational paradigm. Neither the founder nor existing staff may enjoy the new situation. Finally, the founder could buy back the company and try to turn the clock back to earlier, happier days, but the staff then employed may dislike those changes. 4. Change management. If a culture or organization structure has to be changed, then the problem of change management arises. How can we encourage employees and other stakeholders to willingly embrace the change, or at least not to oppose it actively? Communication, education, and participation in the change process are usually advised. Conclusion. Culture and configuration is examinable in the SBL exam, particularly with reference to the cultural web. Candidates must ensure that they can apply theories and principles to the case study scenario. This article is referenced from ACCA technical articles. Click the link below to access the articles.